All right. Good afternoon, everyone. You're welcome to today's meeting webinar series, and this has been hosted by Sing Nigeria in partnership with other renowned agencies. I am your moderator today. It's good to have all of you. It's quite a rainy day here for us here in Nigeria. It's exactly 2 p.m. on the dot, and I know that in other parts of the country, I'm sure the experience is the same. If you are just joining us, this is also the conversation on the developing the oil and gas free zones for global competition and stakeholders' perspective. I will be having this conversation and we'll be listening to 5 speakers. And these 5 speakers are very much aware and they are also going to join us. I already see one of them here raising his hand, is already part of the series. And we have Professor Utomi, who is going to be also joining us. He'll be speaking. And the second person is Reverend Father Edward Obi, MSP. Yes, Reverend Father Obi is a Nigerian social ethics and advocate of global governance and safe environments. If you're thinking, environmental pollution, if you're thinking, glass bearing and what the challenges are, I'm sure you'll be waiting to hear his conversation in this area when he comes up. And we have another guest, Mr. William Vermeer. He is a renowned marketing professional from the Netherlands with over 35 years of experience, and he has contributed to the growth of several international and national brands like Xerox, Nivea Personal Care, etc. And he's here with us already. He's joined us because he's raising his hand. Not yet. Think we'll get to that part first. Let's go through the introductions and then definitely we'll take your lead for any questions. We also have a third person who's going to join us and a fourth person, Honorable Rimande Shaulu Kwewum. Now, that name definitely doesn't, come very ordinary to a lot of journalists. He's a renowned journalist. And I think if you remember The Other Side, the book called The Other Side, which was a feature of special news articles and stories, he was the author of that book, of course, before joining the National Assembly. He is a member representing House of Representatives, representing Donga Usa Takum, special area. I think that is also in Taraba State. He will be speaking on the topic, reviewing the operation of the Extant Oil and Gas Free Zone Authority Act, of CAP 05 LFN 2010, and its implication of oil and gas in business in Nigeria. So you'll be looking out for that. And then we also have our final speaker here. He is none other than Omana. He's the managing director of Oil and Gas Free Zone Authority, and he is a seasoned administrator. And of course, he will be speaking on the topic, a total overview of Oil and Gas Free Zone Authority in the last 4 years. And definitely he will be bringing to us a progress report in that conversation. So I want to say welcome, gentlemen, for joining us in this webinar series. And I think it is quite refreshing for us to be having this conversation, considering the fact that the oil and gas free zone conversation has been ongoing. I mean, amidst the whole COVID-19 pandemic, there seems to also have been a previous conversation early March towards May on what could be done to review the laws for oil and gas sector in Nigeria to be able to accommodate the ever-changing scenario that we find ourselves. A lot has been asked about the 1996 Oil and Gas Act, which is over 26 or 20 to 26 years. So this is a very good platform for us to look in between the lines and have this conversation. So what we will try to do today is to provide, conversations that will enable business environments to thrive for stakeholders, especially in the oil and gas sector here in Nigeria and other parts of engagement with Nigeria and other parts of the world. I think that I would go first with our conversation. And I think the first person I will be taking this conversation here would be, as he's ready to go, Mr. Omana. I cannot yet see Professor Pat Utomi. I can see Professor William Beme. But just in case, as we carry on to look at the issues, what we're trying to also do is to see how we can try and help build capacity, you know, in the oil and free gas zone for business development. And I'm sure that Mr. Omana is very well known to that area. And the need for accountability. A lot of people say there seems to be a lot of, you know, need for accountability, probity, transparency in achieving the global goals. You know, to understand and help enhance the fulcrum of sustainability in the oil and gas sector. So, good afternoon, Professor. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon. I am good. I'm sorry I was struggling with one other device, and I had to give up and turn to this device. So all is well. I have learned enough to have like 3 of these devices available.
Absolutely.
For these things. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. And, you know, you have such a wide experience, you know, as a management expert and also a professor of political economy. And when you're thinking political economy, you cannot rule out oil and gas, absolutely, which is a fulcrum of sustainability for us here right now in Nigeria. We're still looking at a monogamy of that industry here. So we are very optimistic that you will definitely deploy your wealth of experience in that, you know, discourse. So we'll take you on first. And your topic is a very interesting topic, repositioning the oil and gas free zone for global competitiveness. That is quite the conversation to have now, especially as we're looking at a post-COVID era. Where do we go from here? The downturn of the economy. So there's so many questions regarding that. So you have about, you know, 20 minutes to go through that, and then if there are questions, we will definitely be coming in between the lines. So,
okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. I think that when we look at the oil and gas sector, a number of things must agitate our minds at this time. One is the fact that the world just entered the 4th industrial revolution. From the 1st of this of January of this year, formally, we entered the 4th industrial revolution, even though some of the levers of the 4th industrial revolution have been around with us for a long time. I mean, one of the key levers of that revolution, very obviously, is artificial intelligence. Many people don't realize that as a formal academic discipline, artificial intelligence has been around since 1956. It's a formal academic discipline. But the range of technologies that form the basics of the 4th industrial revolution have been evolving, and our world is about to change in a very dramatic way. And dealing with this at such a time, I think, is something that we have to keep there at the back of our minds as we look at competitiveness in a traditional sector. How will technology change competitiveness in a sector that has been traditional for a long time? So that's the first thing that I would like to make. The second point, I think, is that the oil and gas business, as we know, the reliance on fossil fuels as a key driver of energy for development is also in a changing trajectory. Most of us know that a lot of developments in terms of fueling motor vehicles, for example, based on fossil fuels, might not be the way things will be in a few short years going forward. We also know that issues of the environment are going to force very careful consideration of how fossil fuels are used going forward. At the same time, this is going to be further compounded by new technologies that provide power that we are going to be having coming in. So moving away from fossil fuels is clearly something that the world is dealing with. What consequence does this have? Does it mean that oil and gas assets are just going to become irrelevant? Not really. It just means that the way that we explore them and deploy them may be significantly different going forward. Now, if we think competitiveness with these resources, these assets that we have in oil and gas, we've got to think a number of things. First of all, what does global competitiveness really mean? And how have they been achieved traditionally? I would like to begin by saying that essentially competitiveness deals with the fact of production output and economic output based on production is the heart of growth of economies. One of the big challenges we have had as a country is that we have tended to be driven more by a look at revenues rather than a look at production. Revenues invariably have to do with sharing. And we have had a prebendal political economy, which is about where the revenues let us share. But economies that have been strong and have grown throughout human history have been economies that have depended on production. How do we produce more effectively, more efficiently, more competitively? That's what sustains economic growth. Whenever I talk about this, I often like to give the example of Spain. Spain is a country that acquired a lot of wealth, a lot of assets, revenues from gold and all of that as the conquistadores, colonized, captured Latin America, shipped back to Spain, all this wealth, and come down a couple of generations, and Spain, which had all that, is not one of the rich countries of Europe. It is because they did not emphasize investing in their next generation. We need to achieve competitiveness in a way that will help us to be able to produce. Mm-hmm. So competitiveness really is about sharpening your comparative advantage by being a lower cost, higher quality source of output for a given product or service. How do we become that in the world? One of the things that we have learned, again, from some of our contemporaries who have gone ahead to do well in Southeast Asia, for example, is that competitiveness has been facilitated by clusters, by production being in certain enclaves where they have shared costs, efficiency comes from that, where infrastructure is optimum, even if there isn't enough infrastructure in the rest of the country, but within those clusters, we provide optimum infrastructure so that they can be competitive. This is what has led to the so-called industrial parks, so-called trade-free zones, and the rest of them. They have come out of industrial policy in Southeast Asia. If we have those kinds of clusters where efficiencies are achieved, usually what happens is output from them gets externalized, which brings another point about the nature of competitiveness. There have been a variety of studies on how economies have become more competitive globally. And patterns are obvious. They develop. Why do the Germans dominate the world in luxury automobiles? Mercedes-Benz, Audi, BMW. So that's a pattern, dominating certain value chains. Why do the Japanese dominate? For a long time, they dominated electronics, quality electronics. Why do the South Koreans now seem to be displacing them from electronics, quality, lower, not, automobiles, like where Toyota was, and now Daewoo, Kia, and Co are playing in. There are reasons why all of these have happened. Why does Texas dominate in the oil and gas? Why does California in tech, ICT? Because these clusters provide certain kinds of efficiencies, provide certain kinds of supply chain efficiencies again, and all of that. So clusters are very important for building of competitiveness, as we have seen around the world. There's also a phenomenon that's very, very important in my view. And again, Southeast Asia teaches us a lot about it. When you ask, why did all this group of countries around Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, why did they all kind of begin to make progress and all of that? There have been a number of efforts to explain those kinds of advances using all kinds of things from Confucian discipline to this and that and that. But a Malaysian economist who I like is not very much, K.S. Jomo Sinduran. He spoke once in Nigeria here, I think when Kim Belosage was chair of UBA. UBA started an international economic speaker series, and they brought K.S. Jomo many years ago. I don't remember, probably up to 20 years ago. And he made a point. He's the author of a book that's titled Southeast Asia's Misunderstood Economic Miracle. Kes was making the point that whereas all these explanations are thrown up, what simply happened in Southeast Asia was that one country began to do things right, do it very well, I guess that's Singapore, and their neighbors looked across and said, no, we won't be left behind, when they began to imitate, to do the same kinds of things. And after a while, they were all flocking in the same direction. And he calls this the flying geese hypothesis. You know, so if we begin to do some things right and begin to make progress, our neighbors will look across from us. Same thing with industry. You know, begin to get some clusters that are working together. Others will begin to do similar clusters, and together we become more efficient, become more competitive. And as we begin to compete strongly internally, one free zone with another, we will become much better at what we do. And the tendency is for the externalization into global markets of that greater efficiency and effectiveness in the way that we engage. And that is often what leads to a country or an economy dominating in terms of its comparative advantage on value chains across the world. Why Germany dominates automobiles, luxury automobile market, for example, and so on and so forth. So what we have to learn and take to the oil and gas business in terms of our trade-free zones concern is to begin with the nature of our factor endowments. What are our endowments in oil and gas? Where can we locate these nodes of free zones and their specializations within how we expect the oil and gas business to evolve from the hydrocarbon chain? When we take the derivatives from the hydrocarbon value chain, and then we specialize that this trade-free zone in Eket or wherever, and that trade-free zone in that place will focus on certain derivatives from hydrocarbons, become the most efficient producer of that derivative, and, you know, begin to dominate the value chain from those sets of derivatives, if you will. Education of people in the country or around those areas focus on how to be the most capable people in working that particular value chain of that derivative. So that when we look around, we will find that when you think of skills, I mean, just take oil and gas, for example. Why does Egypt, strangely, is one of the biggest oil producers, why does Egypt dominate deep sea diving in oil and gas? Well, because years ago, some players from there essentially began to focus on developing talent in that kind of area. And suddenly Egypt built up that specialty and began, I mean, in a silly way, let me come back to, use a local funny example. Why were people from, say, Cross River, Akwa Ibom, well known for the hospitality, that we describe domestic business? Because like 80 years ago, some man went and became a cook for somebody, sent for his cousin, said after a while, most people from that area just like the idea of being cooks or whatever. I don't know. So that's how, these things develop. So if we commit to this trade-free zone in this part of the hydrocarbon value chain, this specialty school located in that trade-free zone area, training people to develop certain key skills that makes them the most in demand around the world for doing that, just as we look for the Egyptian guys to go and do underwater painting of some boat or something. We will then find that we can be so competitive on those value chains of those hydrocarbons derivatives that we choose to focus on. This is my view, how we can win the post-COVID-19 future around the oil and gas business, because we would be needing to get so much more out of our hydrocarbons value chain than we are currently getting out of crude oil. And the ability to, first of all, recognize particular endowments, take a strategic view of what we do with those endowments, develop industrial policy to support competitiveness on the value chains of those particular hydrocarbon derivatives that we choose to become our key areas of global performance, and then essentially provide incentives based on those, not in having across the board kinds of protection or this or that, but select areas over a period of time, all the support, whether it's financing support, whether it's education, know-how, know-why support, such that we become, therefore, global leaders and key players on those particular dimensions.
Okay, so staying with the professor part, I know you said something quite significant. You said doing it right. You talked about efficiency, especially in the externalization of the global market, which is very critical. But then again, you look at a lot of the definitions of what obstacles could mean for different stakeholders or different countries, especially some people who also operate within the Nigerian borders and are key stakeholders in the oil sector. And some of the obstacles that have been mentioned quite, oftentimes have been factors such as, non-competitive pricing. Some have also mentioned thin market risk, and some have mentioned restrictive contracts and government trade restraint. But somebody also mentioned that there is also a lack in political will to also look at that as one of the key issues within the oil sector in Nigeria. You are a political economist, and I think that comes critically within your sector. How do we begin to define what role political will does for us, as an oil producing country, and especially looking at the oil and gas free zones authority?
Well, that's a very, very important question, and one that I alone cannot resolve. It's a collective thing for every Nigerian. In 1998, I published a book that was titled Managing Uncertainty, Competition and Strategy in Emerging Economies. And the central thesis in that book is that one of the biggest risks of doing business in emerging economies, and Nigeria was archetypal of that kind of developed economy, was government as a risk. Why is government a risk? Because the goals of government are not always so clear. It's owned by so many stakeholders. Unlike a company, the stakeholders clearly know what they want out of this company. Government owned by all can be run by those who can use divergent stakeholder emphasis to make choices which turn out to be either contradictory or detrimental to the environment of business. I offered in that book a framework of analysis, which I call the 3E framework. 3E deriving from emerging economies environment, emerging economies environment framework. And that framework takes a typical model of competitive strategy from structural economics, the so-called structure, conduct, performance paradigm in structural economics. Most famous of those models is one offered by a Harvard professor called Michael Porter, and the 5 forces. And I said, if you use this model to predict the competition environment in Nigeria, you would fall flat on your face. Because a simple thing like somebody meeting the minister at night, working some deal with him, and the minister going to effect the next day and getting an outcome that nobody in the effect thought through, but which was detrimental to the interest of everybody else in the industry. And there were so many of them. I used so many illustrations in the book of such. One of my favorite illustrations is flour mills, or the flour milling business, where Nigeria, for example, banned importation of wheat, of flour, at a point in time, so that people could import wheat and then mill flour. And then got to a point in 1986, we are actually from 1st of January 1987, wheat was banned to at least the excuse was that it would then help for backward integration, grow wheat locally, and then get flour out of it. But when I first presented that case study, I had the MD of Flour Mills of Nigeria, the late Amosu, in my class. And after the discussion, he said, well, there's something you guys haven't taken into consideration in this conversation. The man who made that decision to ban the importation of wheat before he became president had wanted his friends to get a waiver to bring in flour when flour was banned. And the flour milling industry protested and went to the then head of state, who ensured that nobody got a waiver. And that man had already told his friends to bring in, to start heading to Nigeria with shiploads of flour, in the understanding that he was powerful enough to get a waiver. But when flour milling industry blocked it, he was embittered towards that industry. And as it turned out, that was his revenge on the flour milling industry. I mean, stuff like that. So in my frame, I had what was an overarching variable, which was called the predatory acts of public officials in the environment of decision making. So you find invariably that one of the biggest risks of doing business in Nigeria is regulatory risk. If you are in banking, unfortunately, your greatest source of danger may be central bank, unfortunately, and because our institutions are weak. So I agree with people who say that that is a problem. But how do you solve that problem? You talk about political will. It's in Nigerians all becoming engaged and becoming active in trying to change the way that government does business. The way things are today, all you need is for one person to be appointed governor of central bank, minister of this or minister of that, and he decides to do things to deal with his enemies, quote unquote. In the end, the Nigerian industry or the whole economy pays a dear price. We still don't have a strong enough institutional arrangement that one wrong appointment, doing something wrong, will not we will receive pushback from the institutions. I mean, look at President Trump. Powerful as the US president is, on many things he tried to do, immigration, this, that, the courts were pushing back. And we don't have those kinds of strong institutions. Because we don't have those strong institutions, we tend to be significantly challenged in this regard. So what's the solution? Solution is that the private sector must see its collective self-interest in working together to assure that there are stronger institutions. Citizens across the board have to be knowledgeable enough to know that certain kinds of policy choices do greater harm to the prospects of the growth of the economy in the long term, so that they don't just accept banal commentary from public officials to use to make decisions that eventually hurt the environment of business and makes it difficult for progress to take place.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor. I think that's as much we can take from you. I think it's about 20 minutes. And I think something clear, very evident in some of the things you've said was one, government as a risk, and looking in between those factors that constitute that, as well as also looking at doing it right to be able to beat efficiency in the externalization of the global market. And that's also not to look at the issue of the volatility of the hydrocarbon revenues. And what,
by the way, sorry, just a little, government is a risk in the environment of business in our country, but it does not have to be.
Okay.
Southeast Asia got where it is today because government, which could have been a risk, under the right kind of leadership, recognized that it should play differently and things change for those countries. That's why they used to be poorer than us. Now we are much, much poorer than them.
And that was our first speaker, Professor Patrick Utomi, was speaking on the repositioning of the oil and gas-free zones for global competitiveness. And we'll definitely be taking questions along the line, but we'll definitely want to have all our speakers come out and talk to us a bit about our topics today.